Welcome back to another episode of Capes and Tights, a comic book and pop culture podcast. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Adam is off this week visiting family in Illinois. Merry Christmas to Adam. Happy New Year, all that stuff. He'll be back very soon to talk on the next episode of Capes and Tights. This week around, we have Gibran Graham, owner, proprietor of Briar Patch Books in downtown Bangor, Maine. It's a bookstore. Started off as a kids bookstore, but now sells a number of different novels and books and things like that. They also sell a lot of comic book related product, as in graphic novels and other books as well. So Gibran and I talked comic books, we talked graphic novels, we talked novels, we talked a bunch of different random things. She had a couple of interests in small world things about the two of us. So check this episode out with Gibran Graham of Briar Patch Books in downtown Bangor, Maine. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Instagram and Facebook is at Capes and Tights Podcast. Twitter is at Capes Tights Pod. And you can visit us at capesandtights.com, as well as download, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff, anywhere podcasts are found, including Apple and Spotify. So check this episode out. Gibran Graham of Briar Patch. Thanks, everybody. How's it going? Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Exactly. We've been trying to set this up for a little while. Schedules, craziness. It's kind of funny because we do pass each other. I don't say quite often, but like over the past couple of years, it's been a little bit less actually because of the pandemic. But we see each other here and there, and it's funny that we actually get a chance to actually sit down and chat. It's exciting to me. So, well, welcome to the program. We'll get chatting about books and all kinds of stuff here in a second. I ventured out. So you and I mean, we've been posting on Facebook and stuff like that. Been trying to be pretty safe with this whole pandemic stuff. I have a newborn. I say newborn. He's 7 months as of yesterday. But trying to be pretty safe and stuff like that. But we did venture out today and see Spider-Man. I have put off seeing movies in the movie theaters for what I think the last movie we tried to figure out. I think the last movie we went and saw was Spider-Man Far From Home, which would have been summer of 19.
Right.
And so we said, you know what? I don't want to have any spoilers. There's something about it. I didn't see Eternals. I didn't see Shang-Chi in the theaters. I just said, you know what? We'll wait. We'll figure it out. My wife and I looked at the seats at the Bangor cinemas. We found some seats that weren't near anybody else. I was like, as long as we wear a mask the whole time. I was not happy being there. I'll tell you that much right now. I was like, I can't believe I fell for this and went into this, but we felt safe. We saw it. Great. It was great. I'm not going to give any spoilers here if anybody hasn't seen it yet. It was well worth the trip, at least. Like if I got out of that movie theater and I was like, oh my God, that was not worth it. And in the pandemic and all this stuff, I would have been very sad. But, I'm home now. I'm not going back to the theaters anytime soon. I made a small exception. But yeah, so it was fun. So that was my day today. And then now we get to chat about all kinds of things here on the podcast. So how was your day today?
My day was pretty good. I got to talk about the movies though. So, the last time I was in the movie theater was for Black Widow. And it was the only movie I've seen since the pandemic started. I went with my daughter, who was home briefly from Chicago when the movie came out. And I was kind of in the same boat as the way you're telling it. We're going to see Spider-Man today. I enjoyed the movie immensely. Marvel movies are made to see on the big screen. But I was just like, what am I doing here? And I feel like that's been the case with all of like the really awesome movies that have been coming out. It's like we start to feel like maybe things are getting a little bit better and there's going to be a movie. And then it's like, oh God, no, don't do this. So yeah, I haven't seen Shang-Chi. I haven't seen Eternals, didn't see Venom. I probably will see Shang-Chi now that it's on streaming, and I think Eternals starts streaming on the 12th of January. But I'm really missing seeing Spider-Man, I've given up the idea that I will be spoiler free. I mean, it's going to happen, but at the same time, when I do see it, I know I'm going to enjoy it thoroughly, as I have all the movies. So, but other than that, how has my day been? Well, I work retail. I own the Briar Patch, bookstore in downtown Bangor, which I've owned for about 4 years now. 4.5. Bought it in 2017 from the previous owner who I worked for a while. And holidays are retail craziness. And with everything that we've been going through the past, 2 years, you wonder what it's going to be like. We have been doing walk-ins now with masks in the store for everyone for a little while now. But this time last year, we were just doing appointment shopping. So we would have one family in at a time. And it can be a little overwhelming still with having so many people in the store at once. But at the same time, it's great. I love when there's tons of people in the store and you're just like, you're like in a pinball machine. You're the ball, and you're just going from customer to customer, and trying to help them and put, some awesome books in their hands, and make sure everybody leaves happy. And I really enjoy doing that. So it's been exhausting, but also it's a great time. And I'm really glad that people are reading and buying books.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny too, because I don't know, on this program, people have actually listened to our podcast and know that I didn't start reading like fully until I got a little older. I always was very bad at reading even in high school. I took reading classes and things like that. And comic books got me into like actually reading written word on page, because it was so like I could read a book and be done. I didn't feel it took me a little bit longer than most people took to get through a comic book, but at least I got to it and I could finish it. And the story had a beginning and an ending, and it was pretty much done. And then I started reading. You remember the show Ghost Hunters? I don't know. It was on Sci-Fi for a while. They did like investigations into paranormal and stuff like that. Well, they had a book that came out that was like some of the show episodes that didn't air, and they just kind of put them into small segments. And I was like, I could read at night. I could read like 3 or 4 pages and get through like an episode of it, and I was very happy. And then as I got older, I started reading more and so on and so forth. So it wasn't until this year basically where I was like, someone can buy me a book as a gift and I would actually be happy. Like an actual book, like a novel, not just like a comic book or a graphic novel. Like this is 2021 was the year I was like, if I open a Christmas present under the tree on December 25th and there's an actual book in there, I won't be upset.
That's very cool. I mean, let's be honest. You and I, we're geeks, we're nerds. Yeah. We love comics, and within that, there's so much to grab onto in book form that is attached to these heroes, these comic book characters, the video game characters and worlds and sci-fi worlds and TV shows. There's so many books that tie into all of that, and I feel like I grew up reading the TV and movie tie-in books completely. I'm a huge Doctor Who geek, and I remember when I was in grade school, catching Doctor Who on television and it being this, kind of weird old, British TV show. Not sure I got everything, but I just loved it because it was just so imaginative. And there were only so many episodes that were brought over to America by that point, or even still exist of the old, 60s and 70s shows. But there were novelizations of so many of these that were available, and I would just pick them up like candy and consume them. I might have gotten made fun of in school a little bit having them. It's time to read, class, and I pull out my Doctor Who book. But I feel like I had a little revenge when Doctor Who became super cool in the past 10 years. So, take that.
Well, I feel like that's what we've gone through as a whole. And we talk about quite often with my friends and I is like, I feel like I can be open about my geek and nerd culture lifestyle because it's actually not forbidden anymore. It's actually pretty cool. Like if you wore a shirt that said Doctor Who on it now out in public, someone would actually be like, oh, sweet shirt. Not like, oh my God, look at the nerd over there. Like it's actually become more what it is, pop culture. It actually has become popular again, which is pretty cool.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, I'm wearing a superhero shirt right now. It's like the fact that you can go into a Target and you can just buy a Star Wars or superhero shirt, or, seriously, I can walk into a store and buy a Green Lantern t-shirt. This is heaven, right? I love that can happen now.
It's awesome. And I think that the same thing with these, like, the pop vinyl figures and stuff like that you can get all over the place. But I also, the ability to just shop for other people with this stuff too. Like I think that like you mentioned going into Target and grabbing some things. It's like I can buy things for friends now because they're also into the same thing I'm into. I haven't had this in my lifetime until about the past 10 years or so. I mean, I'm only 35, so it's not like I've had a long lifetime. But even like early 20s. I mean, the early 20s, though, if I went and bought something that said Iron Man on it and gave it to someone, they would be like, why do you think I would like this? Now I actually have quite a few people that I can reach out to and say something to that actually have connected to it. And a lot of it is, to me, is the movies probably. But that also has garnered things like the movies like Star Wars has always been attached to books in a sense. Before it was fan fiction, a lot of that stuff. But nowadays, the whole High Republic stuff, I've actually had this conversation with multiple different age groups, because there's all the way down to young adult kids books in this High Republic stuff, to comic books, to graphic novels. One of my favorite authors, Charles Soule, he has a book that's a High Republic book. So it's kind of awesome that the things that have brought people to see the screen have also now made it into books as well, currently, for all age groups, which is amazing.
Right. I mean, if you look in old comics from like the 70s and 80s, there are tons of, full and half page ads for mail order comic book related merchandise, and that would be like, at the time, that was the only place you'd find like a Thor t-shirt or something like that, and maybe you got to mail order some of that stuff, but most of the time you look at that and you're like, oh, I really want that, and you probably will never get it. And now, like we're saying, you can just walk in, you can buy it for yourself, buy it for your friends. I feel like I can actually give my family lists for, this is what I'd like for Christmas, and they could actually get it without having to do some deep dive into a comic book store where they don't know their way around.
This is the comic book, this is the place you need to go. It's the third shelf over, second item in, that's what I want. Nope, they can just like Google it or go to a local shop. Or, I mean, my buddy Paul over at Galactic has stuff for sale that a lot of people would like too. So it is pretty cool. That's made it more mainstream and easier for us to get, for sure.
Exactly. And it's great that, so throughout my life, I feel like comic book stores were hidden gems, and they were places where, you almost had to be, I feel like you were part of a secret club, to actually be the ones that go inside. But now you go into a comic book store, and sometimes you go into, Galactic Comics, and you can see people from the neighborhood come in, they're shopping for their kids, that kind of thing. And that's great. And the fact that Paul has like some awesome collectibles in there too, whether they're new or used, stuff, vintage, it's really cool. I have a problem not spending too much money when I go in there. I mean, I walk in and I see the stuff he's got on the walls, and I'm like, oh man, that Super Powers figure, still on the blister package. Oh, how do I not get that?
I texted him last night. I said, I have a database I put my comic books in, the CLZ database, and I'm putting it in. I'm realizing as I'm putting them in, and I search for Wolverine has a new Wastelanders, which is based off of the podcast, the scripted podcast they've been putting out. And so I was like, oh, this is a cool one shot. And I realized they're going to make us a Hawkeye one and a Star-Lord one and a Black Widow one and so on. And I realized cover B is a connecting variant. So you can line them all up, right, and have a big connecting thing. So I texted him and I was like, hey man, I didn't know, did you get the cover B? I got cover A, but do you have cover B? He's like, yeah, I think I have some, and I'm getting them for all the rest of them too. And I'm like, dude, you just like taking my money, don't you? Like, come on. He goes, I just got to get you into Pokemon now. I'm like, nope, all set. Like, nothing wrong with Pokemon. People can love Pokemon. I already spend enough money on collectibles. I don't need to have another thing to spend money.
I'm sure he'll give you the first one free.
Yeah. It's because everything else is all the money that I spent there, between there and Top Shelf downtown. And, I have a book waiting. I had to go pick it up this week, actually. The book waiting at your spot. I just feel like there's always a place, and everybody has something for me now, I guess, in downtown Bangor area. And Paul's stuff definitely got all that stuff. I've just been over at Paul's more than anybody else's spot. There's a couple spots you can buy comic books and collectibles and stuff like that in the Bangor area. But Paul's, when you have an owner who treats you well and loves it, like you treat your customers well, and that's one of the reasons why you did that whole only one family in at a time, was for your safety, but it's also for the other customers' safety. And so when you have an owner that cares and treats their customers well, you're going to see return customers, and that's what Paul's done to me. So shout out to Galactic Comics for sure.
It really is true, the customer service, especially for comics, because there are so many books out there, and there always have been. Here's a little backstory. So the first regular comic book store I ever went to. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and just over the border into New Hampshire, in Seabrook, New Hampshire, was a store. Actually, there's still a store there called Chris's Comics.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know this, but I was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts.
Wait,
and
I went to school. It was stop. I
was born in Newburyport. Okay, 1986. We're a little bit different of an age here, but like I'm not gonna call you out on any age you are, but like I was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts, Anna Jake's Hospital, and my first comic book store I ever went to was Chris's Comics in Seabrook, New Hampshire.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
And they have one in Salem now too. They have a second location in Salem. And then when I moved at 10 years old, I moved up here, but at 20 years old, I moved back to Massachusetts area. And I went comic book shopping at both the Chris's and Seabrook, but also Salem. And they have a Newbury Comics down the street from Chris's in Salem now as well. But yeah, that's actually pretty funny. That's awesome.
That's hilarious.
That's small world.
No, I graduated Newburyport High School in 91. That's well, we'll have to talk more about that some other time. But
that's a comic book store of comic book stores, meaning that like if you want to picture in your head what a old school random comic book store full of, I hate to say junk, but look like it's full of junk. We know it's hidden gems. But if you just bring some, like when I brought my wife in there for the first time, she was just like, because there's just like boxes of books, and like there's nothing, it's organized and not really organized.
Right.
And that's a gem, because that's where you go in there and you find random books here and there, and they know what they're doing. But you walk in there, it's just like, you could tell this bookstore didn't open last week. Like this comic book store has been here for a long time.
Exactly. It's funny if you go there now, and it's in a little strip mall that has like, it's kind of funny. It's got like I think it was a.
Is there an adult film store there?
Adult film store in the strip mall. There's
fireworks shop.
There's all the vices, and the comic book store.
Yeah.
But when I first started going there, they were in a different location, a little south from them, and it was actually just in like this house that was across from another shopping plaza, and the manager at the time, his name was Vince, and he really kind of just cultivated my love of comics. I was so much a Marvel zombie at the time, and because where I had access on a newsstand to comics in Newburyport at the time, they only carried Marvel, some Archie and some other stuff, but no DC. So it was just Marvel all the time.
My kind of store.
Right. Yeah. See, exactly. You're a Marvel zombie. I know. So, so I went in there, I got my first subscription service, my pull list with, my Marvel titles I put in there, and go in there every, couple of weeks or whatever to pick up my books, or, whenever my parents would give me a ride up there. One time, this is a funny story. This is a tale for you, my friend. So I get in there one time, and I look at my pull list and pull out what's in my bag, and there's this Batman comic, and I was like, I didn't ask for this, and I'm like, I'm middle school, almost high school, whatever. I'm like, I didn't ask for this. I said, I think this is in my bag by accident. And Vince goes, oh, well, so we put a copy of that in all the subscribers because it's really hot. Everybody's talking about it. We wanted to make sure none of our good customers didn't get one. And I was like, well, I don't read Batman. No, it's okay. Thanks. So I passed on Dark Knight Returns #1. I'm pretty sure anybody watching this can feel that pain, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an awful moment when I look back on it. And it wasn't too long after that I actually got into DC Comics, and at the same time, so I was buying like all the superhero books from both the major companies every week. By the time I was through high school, it was, may not be as expensive as it is now, with comic books being, $3-4 a piece,
Yeah.
but even at 75 cents to up to $1.25 some of those years, it was a lot of books and a lot of money for a kid. But yeah, man, I gave up Dark Knight #1. Yeah. So, but
That's
I
the
mean,
problem with books like that, though, is like that story that leads into places like me where I'm like, I have my pull list at Galactic Comics and I go in there and I grab them. And then I look at the shelf of new comics and I'm like, what's that book? And he's like, oh, that's a new book from Image or whatever. And I'm like, that might be optioned at some point for I'm gonna pick, and I just buy. I have these books now that don't mean anything, and probably won't be worth anything ever. I never read them. It's just like, oh, maybe they'll turn into something someday.
you
So
never
there's the
know.
other side of that. It's also bad that as much money as you potentially would have had in a book with Dark Knight Returns, I probably
Right.
spent on other comic books that are worth nothing.
But honestly, if you got a good comic book store owner, you got to listen to
Yeah.
them. I would say most of them really know their stuff, especially if they read the books or really follow what's going on, and talk to their customers. Whether it's stuff that they like or they hear from the customers that they like. They know what's going on, and they'll introduce you to some great books.
And if you've shopped there for a long time, this is including not just comic book stores owner, but honestly a bookstore owner as well.
Yeah.
So you shop there enough, and one of the benefits you have of shopping local and actually talking to a physical human being is they'll curate things for you too. I know this book that's coming out. Like, I'm a comic book fan, and if I hadn't messaged you ahead of time being like, do you have these books that are like based on comic books?
Yeah.
You might have reached out and said, hey, I've got this book coming out. It's, Jeremy Dauber has a book coming out, or Dauber, whatever, how you say his last, I forget to say his last name. I had him on here and I can't remember his last name. That was a history of comic books, and they had the one I just have waiting for you to Ian Rosenberg and Mike Cavallari, whatever. Yeah, there it is. Look at that. Free speech handbook. Like, those kind of things are the things that like a comic book store or bookstore owner would say, hey, I have this. I don't know if you want one. They're never going to force you to buy it, but they're going to recommend it.
Right.
And a funny little story about that is I walked into Galactic Comics one day and I said, hey, Paul, grab my stuff, whatever. And he goes, hey, man, I'm surprised you didn't pull this book. And it was The Department of Truth. It's a fairly popular comic book right now. James Tinian IV is an unbelievable author. He said, I was like, I don't know. I was at that time when that came out, they're on issue like 14 now or something like that. So it was over a year ago. I wasn't really getting a lot of independent books. I was getting most of my superhero books, my Marvel books, a few Walking Dead things, and so on. And I said, yeah, I'm all set, whatever. 6 months go by and I'm walking in there and I'm like, I go out to the back issues and I'm scrolling through and I'm like, what's this Department of Truth thing? It's like on issue 7 or 8 or at the time. Now he's like, that's the one I told you probably would like. You should probably pick it up. And I'm like, well, could you have issue #1? They're like, yeah, they're on the 8th printing of that one. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to get that one. The #1 is going for like 75 and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Next time I'm gonna listen to you and pick that book up, because I ended up buying the first graphic novel, the first collected edition of it, and reading it. And it's unbelievable. I should have listened to my store owner. See, you got to listen to the store.
You do. You mentioned, that there's so many, we were talking about there's tie-in books and things like that. And it's interesting, one of the things that has been going on for, several years now is just how much the original graphic novel scene for younger readers has just exploded. Anybody that's familiar with books like Raina Telgemeier's Smile, Sisters, those books, would know that, middle school kids that read graphic novels, and there's more and more of them every day, just eat them up. And that whole market, has just exploded. Every book publisher now, especially all the major book publishers, have a graphic novel line. Some just for middle grade, some for young adults, some for adult as well. And I feel like every month I'm hearing about a new imprint from another book publisher where they're bringing in some really great talent to do some of these books. And down at the Briar Patch, we we've got whole bookshelves dedicated to all of that product. And this is outside of the Japanese manga market.
Mm-hmm.
This is just, regular, American made comics, graphic novels. And they do phenomenally well. And if you look at sales data from both bookstores and comic book stores, you'd see that some of these books sell more copies than some of the #1 comic bestsellers in comic book stores. I mean, it is just crazy, and go into so many multiple printings that it's really, really amazing. And then so many of them have won a lot of awards and accolades too. Many, I would say probably we've had 3 or 4 books in the past 8-10 years that have been the Maine Student Book Award winner and been a graphic novel. And that comes from the students, the kids in grades 4 through 8, basically voting on those books and choosing a graphic novel to be their best book for the year. That's pretty impressive, and to see that happening all over the country is really great too. But DC and Marvel are no strangers to the fact that this is happening. And so there's something kind of interesting going on now where DC about 3 years ago or so launched 2 graphic novel imprints lines into bookstores, and available at, to be ordered from into comic book stores as well. They started off calling the young adult line Ink and the middle grade line Zoom, but then they just got rid of those and just put ages on them. Mm-hmm. But there's an issue coming out of Teen Titans, or I think it's Teen Titans Academy now. And 2 characters that have never appeared in monthly comics before, but have appeared in original graphic novels, are going to be becoming members of Teen Titans Academy. So one of them is this character for the book Primer, yeah. Which has gone into, hold on, I gotta tell you, what printing is this? This book came out last year, and we're talking huge print runs. And this is already in its 4th printing, okay? So you walk into a bookstore, you're likely to pick up a 4th or 5th printing of this book. And this is her first appearance, okay? It's not in a periodical, it's not in a monthly issue. It's this book. And the other character is from this book called Whistle, which is a Gotham City heroine. Her name is Willow Zimmerman. So both of those characters are going to be appearing in comics for the first time in monthly comics in Teen Titans Academy. But their first appearances are their individual books. So when you talk about wanting to collect first appearances, because I don't know how this will go anywhere, but I mean, you're going to want to try to find a first printing of these books.
Yes.
That's not going to be easy because they've gone to multiple printings in the bookstores now. So, I mean, both of those imprints from DC have tons of really great books. They're getting really well-known, prose authors and artists doing these books. And they're pretty fresh. And they remind me a lot of the kind of fun, superhero adventures that were just in comics that you just pick up to get that story that was just complete in and of itself, really, really good stuff. And Marvel's doing a lot of the same thing too. They're actually, they've been publishing through a couple different publishers where they would put together the teams and then basically have an actual book publisher put out their books. So they've been doing that. They did it a little bit with IDW, although that contract is now over. And they do it with Scholastic. And Scholastic, as anybody who's been into grade school knows, you've got Scholastic book fairs, you've got Scholastic book order forms, that's the penetration, right, that you are seeing comics have all the time now. So you've got things like, Miss Marvel, who's got the upcoming show. That's an original graphic novel that has not appeared in, any other comic format. Miles Morales has got his own volume. I mean, these are, oh wait, hold on. Spider-Ham.
Yeah, see, that's I was gonna say to my wife when we were leaving the movie theater, I was gonna say, I think it has nothing to do with it. It's not spoiler, but saying is I think out of all the Spider-Mans out there, I think Miles Morales, when he got introduced in the comic books, was my favorite Spider-Man as of yet. Nothing wrong with Peter Parker or anything like that. But now you actually take that back. I think Spider-Ham might be my favorite Spider-Man of all time, right? I mean, like, I'm kidding.
The jokes and the puns just can't stop with
all the other Spider Ham is the funniest. Like you think about it, like you're like, oh, Spider Ham, it's kind of funny. But then when you find out when you're reading those books, all the other characters' names, you're like, those are even funnier than Spider Ham as an idea. But that's awesome. Does this is a random question I thought of while you were talking about that was, does Marvel now being distributed by Penguin Random House help you as a bookstore owner? Does it change what you can get, what you can't get? Or I don't know how that works, you buying things compared to, like, I know like Paul needs a diamond thing to get his comic books, a lot of things like that, but now they're just being distributed by Penguin. Does that change anything for you?
So the direct market for comic book stores and the book trade market are really two completely separate animals. So although Penguin Random House is distributing Marvel product to the direct market, they're not distributing it to the book trade. Marvel still has a contract with another of the major 5 book publishers, Hachette, who also distributes all of Disney's product, Little Brown, some other publishers and imprints and stuff too. They're the ones that distribute Marvel product as far as Marvel graphic novels to the book trade. Marvel periodicals, monthly comics are not available to the book trade unless they actually get an account through Diamond. I guess, I was inquiring not because I wanted to carry them myself, but because I'm always interested in the business side of all this for comics. So I actually asked Penguin Random House, I said, so as a bookstore who already has an account with you, can I use my account to get Marvel comics through you, or can I set up another account? And they said, nope, as a bookstore, you cannot do that through us at all. So only if they're a legitimate direct market comic book store, like Galactic Comics, Top Shelf, Christmas Comics, all of the Midtown, whatever. They get it through Penguin Random House. I will say that, however, Penguin Random House distributes DC graphic novels to the book trade. So it's interesting that they've got that sort of, two sides of that big, market for, different outlets. But it's interesting too. We see a lot of the publishers, a lot of the comic book publishers, picking up, getting contracts with some of the major book publishers as distributors for them. IDW and Dark Horse also get distributed by Penguin Random House for the book trade. Oni Press gets distributed through Simon and Schuster. But Diamond itself also is a distributor to the book trade for a lot of other books. Image actually is distributed by Diamond for the book trade. So it's very interesting how different the companies are for both sides. But yeah.
I mean, it's funny because a lot of those things are just thicker comic books. If you think about it, some of those graphic novels or combined volumes of things are just bigger versions of the original thing. I mean, so it's kind of funny how one would have one company deal with specific thicker things, and the other one would be like, okay, this is the one that's like, single issues. You deal with this, and you deal with this one because it's all 5 issues together.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's exactly. And it's one of those things I always, I never. When I got entrenched into the more comic book things, I like single issues. Like single issues is my thing, and this is something that Paul and I always have conversations about. Which is Paul's a graphic novel, trade paperback, omnibus kind of guy, and I am a single issues person. I like the idea. I mean, I'll buy 5 months worth of comic books and read all 5 issues of a miniseries together. But the single issues is what I like. I like to have the individual things. To do that. Same thing if I were to buy Scout Comics in Florida, I wanted to read The Recount, which is a book that they put out that's actually going to be put into something on TV or movie or at some point. It's a 4-issue miniseries, whatever. they had the availability for me to pay for like $9.99 on their website, a PDF version of the book for the whole thing, or $4.99 for each individual digital issue. And I was like, I'll just do that. I spent $20 on these 4 issues because I want the individual issues for some, even PDF wise, I have a problem. No. But it wasn't until more recently where I realized that I got entrenched in these, in the world of comic books, that I wanted to read other things like books that are based on comic book characters. Like you mentioned, the Miss Marvel or the Miles Morales or things like that. I even read books that I'm out of the age group of, because I just got to give myself as much as I can in the Marvel world. And so some of them were, I have a book here, The Cosmic Quest, which was an Avengers Infinity War book. There was Thanos. Thanos has a book. I forget what it's called. I have a bookshelf here. Yeah, Cosmic Quest.
Yeah.
Which is a Infinity War outlet.
That's a 2-part story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. There's another one too, volume 2. I think my wife's reading it, actually. That's why it's not up there. And then there was Thanos Titan Consumed, which was really good as well. And again, I am a huge fan, a Thanos fan. Thanos is one of my favorite comic book characters. And so these are really good. And this is something that I don't think a lot of comic book fans out there would even understand even existed. If they fully stayed in the realm of single issues or periodicals and not ventured into more actual novels of things. Because this, like I said, this is a very good book, I thought. It tells you a little bit more how Thanos, the story behind Thanos becoming who Thanos is. And so I liked it so much. I was like, my wife likes to read. And so I was like, you need to read this. And she was like, I was actually very impressed by that. So, but yeah, there's a lot more of this now, I feel like, than there ever has been. Am I right about that? Or?
Yeah, no, there is, it's interesting again, how especially Marvel, how they license out the use of their characters into other forms of media. Titan Comics, which is a UK outfit, does a lot of Marvel reprints and collector's editions, and also prose novels of characters, that are original work. And I think maybe that Thanos might have been possibly from Titan. I can't remember who the publisher of that one was. Does it say on the side?
It should be on the side. Little Brown.
Oh, okay. So that was okay. So that was through.
They're both Little Brown. Yeah, they're all
okay.
3 of them.
But yeah, there's a whole.
Brandon Snyder did volume 1, but did Brandon Snyder did volume 2 as well?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah,
but yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, there's a whole slew of original novels for all sorts of levels. Whether it's some younger readers or adult readers. The game company Asmodee has their own publishing arm called Aconite, and they've recently, in the past couple of years, been releasing a whole bunch of paperback original novels. They've got like some regular Marvel Heroes line. They also have an X-Men line. I've actually just read one from the X-Men line called Triptych, and their X-Men stories all take place during the Brian Michael Bendis X-Men Uncanny X-Men run, where they were up in an old Weapon X facility in Canada. So they all take place during that time frame, which is really interesting, because that's like, what is that, like 5-8 years ago? I don't know.
Yeah, roughly.
When that all happened. Yeah. And so these stories, I guess Marvel probably said, hey, you can tell new X-Men stories within this time frame, because it's not going to mess up anything that we're doing. You can even call it like it's in continuity. But I just read one of those actually, and really thought it was fantastic. So there's all sorts of that stuff coming out, and honestly, sometimes you'll find things like that in a comic book store, but a lot of times their bread and butter is the comics themselves. So they might not take chances on some of that stuff. But while most of comic book stores work on a sort of non-returnable status with their vendors, bookstores usually have a returnable status with their vendors. So we take a chance on a lot of things that we can bring in and then return back to the publisher if it doesn't sell for credit towards other things. So, that's why you'll walk into the Briar Patch, and because I'm a nerd, I've got all sorts of sections of geeky stuff, outside just, the regular graphic novels. I've got like Marvel, Star Wars, Doctor Who, Dark Crystal, all sorts of crazy, awesome stuff. And it brings me a lot of joy when, someone walks in, whether they're an adult or a kid or a family, and they're like, "Ooh, Dark Crystal stuff. I've never seen this before." And I'm like, take it all in.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, we live in a world of such nostalgic. I feel like it doesn't matter what, even if I mean, I love Dark Crystal, but I'm saying, like, even if people were like thought the movie was cheesy or old, or something about the nostalgicness of it brings people back and was like, "Oh, I need that," or "I want to read that,"
Right.
which is crazy. I met Atreyu from the Neverending Story at the Comic-Con a
Right.
couple of months ago, and it was like, it brought me so far back. I hadn't seen the Neverending Story in 15 years or so, but it was just like, oh, I gotta watch this again. And something about the nostalgic right now, and so having a Dark Crystal something would be amazing. I feel like you could just print money by printing anything again. Any story from the 80s or early 90s,
Right.
you could print again, and it would
Yeah.
be like printing money because people just want that old school
You should see the
stuff.
Labyrinth tarot cards that we carry.
What?
They rock. Yeah. So any Labyrinth fans out there, come get these tarot cards. They're awesome.
Oh, that's pretty funny. I mean, because of the pandemic, we were just talking, my wife and I were just talking on the way back from the theater, was how crazy the world is right now. That's the fact that, like, we used to leave our house not worrying about getting sick. Like, obviously during cold season and flu season, you were like, oh, get your flu
Right.
shot or whatever. But like right now, it's like, I don't remember, like, it's hard for me to remember a time where I didn't like prepare to leave my house, make sure I have my mask, my hand sanitizer, stuff like
Right.
that. Whereas 2 years ago, that. So like I haven't stepped foot in Briar Patch in 2 years, which is sad to say. Just not.
Oh, I know.
You guys have been, you guys have been safe, and we, like I said, it's if any of the stores I would go into, it's one of the stores I would go into because of that. But it's just kind of, it's sad in that aspect of it. But you have an online store?
So we do, in a way. We have, if you go to briarpatchbooks.com, you'll see it's a link tree, and
Yeah.
it'll have some links to different things. And one of the links is our online bookshop site, which is a third party vendor, so that people can order things.
Okay.
It's a much wider variety than what we carry in the store. And they order stuff to have shipped directly to them at home. So we still get credit for all those sales, but it just allows people a much wider variety of what's out there. And it was a solution that we put in place at the start of the pandemic, because we didn't have a robust online option, and so many people really just weren't going out, obviously, and needed things to be delivered. So that worked out really well. It still does, but we try to tell people all the time that it's not connected to our in-store inventory. So if you see it says in stock, it doesn't mean we have it in the store. But people, if you're looking for something on there, you can give us a call, and say, "Hey, do you have this?" And I'll be like, "Yes," or I'll say, "No, but I can order it in for you if you want to pick it up at the store." That's not a problem. So yeah, I mean, there's options.
And you work with people. So like if I, like I mentioned to you, I messaged you quickly and said, I need this book. Can I get this book? You like, I have one, I put your name on it. I'll come in and pay for it and so
Yeah.
on. So I'm sure you have other ways of helping people out so they can be as safe as possible as well. And buying books nowadays. Don't not shop locally because you're worried about the pandemic. There's ways we can make this happen because,
Right.
every store needs some help, but local shops are also struggling through this time still. When people say when we were in the pandemic, I want to remind people over and over and over again that we still are in the pandemic.
That's right. That's right. It's not
Back
over. We
back
wish it
when we
was
were in the
over.
pandemic, I'm like, guys, we still are in it. It's still happening now. But we did something.
Absolutely.
It was similar with my day job at Orna Brewing Company. Is we were trying to get people merchandise to their house. We obviously distribute beer now in multiple states, and so we were trying to figure out a solution of like, do we sell it on our online store, pack it in the store, and ship it? And I felt like after we did some ideas on what we could get, is I'd have to hire an entire person just to do that in the store,
Mhm.
which wouldn't be very, profitable in
Yeah.
that sense. So we went to a third party distributor, similar thing, where they print up some things, store them, and when someone orders it online, they put it in a package and ship it to them. In an overall scheme of things, we don't make as much money on it, but to us, it was really getting it in the hands of people, making a smaller amount of money on it, and getting the merch to people, and making it easy on ourselves during the pandemic. And maybe after things slow down again at some point, and we get somewhat back to normal, we'll switch it up. But yeah, there's definitely a cool thing about that happened over the past 2 years of like making it easier for us to get things in the hands of people, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I gotta hand it to a lot of the companies, that we work with, whether they're, publishers or other people in the book industry or, online solution people, people really came together, they
Mhm.
saw the need, and I'm sure, on some level, places like Zoom, obviously stood to make quite a big buck, that we also needed them, like
That
500
that
fold.
still fascinates me how quickly that went from nothing to
Right,
something. Like
right.
it's unbelievable. But yes.
But they did,
Yeah.
things came together, and that really worked out really well. It's interesting because for basically, 10 months, we were completely closed to the public in the store. We were still operating. We were doing curbside phone orders, the online stuff. But even though we had that online solution for stuff shipping out of the distributor's warehouse, we still got a lot of orders in to the store itself, people calling and asking us to ship stuff. And really the inside of the store, since we weren't having customers in, we just became its own warehouse. We had tables for like receiving and table, on the sales floor and for shipping and stuff like that. So by the time that we had, we were to start doing appointment shopping, there was a lot to clean up, and how do we put this store back together so that people can walk in and actually look at things. And I mean, there's still pockets of the store that are sort of like, oh, okay, that's still, we gotta still clean that up.
That's
But
a
it's
throwback to basement comic book stores. That's what you're doing. You're just.
yeah,
I want to be like the history of comic books, where there's like these random stores with the guy sitting behind a counter eating a
yep.
steak sub while you're looking for your books.
I just hope he washes his hand before he touches
Yeah,
those comics.
exactly. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
That's why
yeah.
there's a bag and a board.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, and the other thing we also have available online, if you go to that briarpatchbooks.com link tree, is a link for signed editions and things like that. We do have a second site where we put up stuff that we do carry in the store. Sometimes pre-orders, signed editions of stuff that we get in from time to time, and that's always great too. But we've got, Maine is a really amazing place for authors and illustrators. I mean, you've met a cadre of amazing talent, that work in comics. But outside of that, just people are writing books as well, and illustrating children's books. I mean, it's a huge, huge state for housing so much amazing talent. So we work at trying to make sure that we can highlight our main creators, and be able to get signed copies, or even if it's signed book plates to include in a book,
Mhm.
and ship those out to people, which is really great. It's fantastic to be able to highlight some of this great talent that we have right outside our door.
This is not a main thing, but it's a signed thing. And it just reminded me of it because my wife and I just watched the Stanley Tucci Taste of Italy show he had on CNN. Do you
Mhm.
have any more of those Stanley Tucci books that they
Those are
signed?
I had a case of signed copies, and they are long gone, my friend.
I
Yeah,
missed it too. I saw it and I was like, oh, I got to get one of those. And I just completely forgot about it. And you just reminded me about the signed things on there. I love Stanley Tucci. He's awesome.
he is awesome. Absolutely.
But yeah, so yeah, I love meeting people in the different things. And again, I think 2021, and I hate to say this because I had Elisa Sturgeon on the Maine State of Mind podcast just after the pandemic, basically the middle of the summer of the pandemic
I
of
had Lisa
2020.
Sturgeon in my store today.
No, look
So
at that. Look at that small world again. But she mentioned, and one of the things we talked about was the positive things of the pandemic. And someone kind of villainized her for in the comment section. I was like, no, she wasn't saying that the pandemic was positive. She was saying that in every negative, it's the same thing of one of the things I love about the Marvel movies is that even in sad moments, there's comedy. Even in serious moments, like in a lifetime, every funeral that's ever existed in this world, someone's told a joke somewhere in the crowd. Like there's someone's laughing. It's not they're laughing at the person passing away. They're just we're not 100% serious all the time. And so the same thing with the pandemic, that there's some positive things. You mentioned Zoom is a company that was started not during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, obviously their business did pretty well over the past couple of years. Like it's a positive thing for them. They were there for all of us when we needed them, and so on and so forth. I don't know where I was going with this now, but with the idea that positive things have come out of it, I guess the reading, the 2021, I actually felt like I read more comics and graphic novels and actual books than I've read in my entire life because of maybe extra time. I'm not going out. You know, when I go to work, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, I come home 5 or 6, and I'm home. I don't go do things. And so if I'm just hanging out on the couch, you know, could have the TV on, or I could have a book in my hand. And so I think 2021 has made it so that I've wanted to be more interested in just all kinds of books that are out there. But I also am a collector. I love collecting things. So even if, you know, I think the first time I ever read Thanos, this book was an audio book. I read it, I think I had it on Audible. And I was just because I was driving a lot at the time and I really wanted to listen to it. But I bought the book too because I was like, you know what? I want this book in hardcover. I want to have it. And part of it is, again, just owning physical copies of things. And I guess if I ever meet Barry Aliga, then maybe I'll have him sign the book for me and I'll have a collectible. But no, I don't, just buying physical books. I also am a big fan. I don't know about you, but smelling books.
Oh yeah.
I got that from my dad. My dad loves the smell books. But yeah, so I think 2021 has done that to me this year. I think 2021 to me, other than me, the birth of my son, has been pretty poopy as a whole with what we're living through. But I feel like there's one positive thing, not one, but one of the positive things I think was physically picking a book up, cracking it open and reading it, which is something that a lot of people should do, in my opinion now.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. I completely agree with the point that Lisa had made. It's very true. You know, there are things that we learned to do through the pandemic, or basically, you know, even though it might have existed, we started utilizing that. I don't like, if I don't have to go into a grocery store ever again, I'm good with that. You know, I mean, you know, maybe I need to run in for something. That's one thing, but like, just walking in and realizing that everybody in the entire city is grocery shopping right now. It's just like, you know, not even during a pandemic. It's just a lot of people. It's just like,
you save money too. I only buy what I need. I have this tendency, and I got it from my dad. Oh, that's a cool new flavor of chip. Get that? No, I my bill went down 20% just by not even going into the store anymore.
Yeah, or because they couldn't fill the order.
Yeah, that too. But
but one of the things that I started doing during the pandemic was three friends of mine and I, we've been very close for a number of years, but we sort of don't live so close to each other, all of us anymore. You know, one of us lives in Portland, one of us lives in Dover Foxcroft, one lives in Hamden. That's like, and you know, and I'm in Bangor, and we were talking sort of, you know, I would say a couple months into the pandemic, you know, just online chatting with each other, and you know, someone was reading a run of The Flash. Actually, it was Jeff Johns' run. Actually, no. He was reading all of that entire series of The Flash. He was going through it all on the DC Comics app. And one of us said, hey, you know, when you get to the Jeff Johns issues, I would love to reread those again. So let me know and I'll read them along the same time you are. And we all said, yeah, let's all do that. And so that turned into us meeting on Zoom or some other FaceTime thing at first, and talking every week at a set time about what we read, you know, that week. We would say, okay, we're going to read these 10 issues or whatever, and then we read these 10 issues. And so we did that through that whole run, discussing them and kind of, you know, bonding in a way that, we weren't seeing anybody really else at that time, you know, and we just, you know, we didn't really see each other all that often either, other than like, you know, texting each other. Right.
Yeah.
So that really became just one of the best things that was happening. So we went from reading The Flash to, I think we went from there to reading the original Marv Wolfman, George Perez, New Teen Titans series. And we read through all of that together. Most of us rereading it again. Some of us had always had read it multiple times. And then we all read something we had never read before, which was DC's The Question by Denny O'Neil, and Dennis Cowan with a lot of inks by Bill Sienkiewicz. And this book, I got to tell you, I mean, you don't need to know anything else about the DC universe. Just read The Question. It came out in the 80s, like 86, 87 it started. It is brilliant storytelling. I mean, it is amazing. And so that was a highlight. We went through all of Jack Kirby's New Gods Fourth World Saga. I mean, we were just doing DC. Sorry, Marvel guy, yeah. But and it was a lot of fun. So we decided the beginning of this year that we would start rereading Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then read all of the major DC crossover sagas throughout the whole year. And we were going to record it and podcast it. Well, so we've really only edited and finished the first episode on YouTube. I've got recordings of all the other ones, and one of these days, when I feel like I've got the headspace and the time, we'll finish them up so everybody else can watch it. But it's been one of those great things to be able to get together with friends in this way and read comics that we're really enjoying, or either we got really awful things to say about. And it's, you know, it's so great. And again, it's, you know, it's friends. It's something you love. I mean, it's comics.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like some of these stories, these characters, these themes, they're kind of eternal. But you're also, from reading, you know, all these DC crossover sagas from 1985, 86 on through basically, you know, pre-Flashpoint, pre-new New 52. How much sort of gets recycled, you know, sometimes with ideas or characters and things like that. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And that's I thank the fact that we've had that opportunity during the pandemic to do that.
It's funny how you mentioned the recycle part of it. I'm chapter 4 or 5 of all of the Marvels. There you go. See, and we were just talking about how they just, like, at one point they're like, okay, we can't keep telling the same Spider-Man story over again. Like, right. You gotta, like, let's figure something else out here. And that's one of the things Adam and I discussed on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about reviewing Far From Home and Homecoming Spider-Man movies, where that I'm glad they didn't, like, most of it wasn't based in New York City, and they didn't tell an origin story really, and all that stuff is like, okay, we all know Spider-Man. Like, everybody who's gonna go see the Spider-Man movie knows he was bitten by a radioactive spider. His uncle died. Like, we know that stuff. You don't have to keep on telling that. So it's kind of funny how you mentioned the regurgitation of over and over again. I think I actually have had the question on my list of when I get around to reading some DC stuff, because I just don't. I just have, there's obviously all that Marvel stuff that I want to read. Plus, Image has been putting out a ton of great stuff. Boom, you know, Scout, all those guys have been putting out great stuff. So I haven't had time, which was Paul's been putting me together some stuff, like obviously Dark Knight stuff. He loves the Long Halloween. Not Long Halloween. Was it Long Halloween? Yeah, Batman.
Yeah, Long Halloween. Yeah.
Great story. Kevin, I've always been a fan of Kevin Smith. You know, as a movie maker, as a comedian, he has a great podcast, and he's also always loved The Question. And so it's always been one of those things that if I respect his movie making and his comedy and all that stuff, why would I not respect his recommendations? And so I'm glad you mentioned The Question on here too, because I think now it's going to get me to actually do that. And I think I don't set goals for a year for reading, like, comic books, but I feel like in 2022, my goal is to read a few of those series on the DC side and actually get that crossed off the list, so I can come into these podcasts and say, no, I know that one. Because again, usually I have to, like, pull in Paul here and be like, okay, Paul, we have a question about a DC thing. Can you answer that? Can you come on the podcast for me? Because I mean, for me, I can do a lot of Marvel stuff, but DC has always been out of the reach for me. So I think this year is the year. 2022 is the year to read. I'll read The Question. I'll put that on my my list.
You know, I mean, it would behoove you to you know, read some DC. and
you know this, but you own a bookstore. Have you read every book that's in the book? I mean, that's the other
absolutely,
part about
I've
it.
read
It's like
every single one of those books in my store.
well, when someone comes in, you have, right? I mean, right? Oh, that's my favorite book. Which book should I get? The book you have a ton of that you need to get rid of? That's my favorite book. It's the same
I'm
thing that
always pretty honest.
it's the same thing about beer. When someone's like, "What's your favorite beer?" I'm like, "How much do we have of that one?" Yeah, that's the favorite beer. That's
right,
the
that
one
one.
that's by right now. No,
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't had time. There's just too much there. And you have to say this. You agree with, as a bookstore, there is a point where there's too much good stuff out there.
Sure.
And sometimes you get sucked into reading some bad stuff, and that sucks. It takes time to waste your time. But there's just so much good stuff that I had, graphic novel on graphic novel, trade paperbacks of the Nail Biter series, Something's Killing the Children, that Paul at the shop kept on saying, you need to read these. And I'm like, I will get to it. I'll get to it. I just finished up to issue 20 of the Something's Killing the Children. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was missing that. And the same thing with Nail Biter. I just finished Nail Biter last night. And I just, again, impressed by some of these books that come out. And I'm like, that took time away from either me reading Marvel or DC. And Image is stealing some stuff from me, and I've always loved Image since back when it was founded, because I've always been a Todd McFarlane fan. So there's just too much stuff, and there's not enough time. And now I have a 7-month-old, so there's even less time.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, there's so many great books out there. There's so many great comics out there. You mentioned being a single issue guy. I can't do it anymore. I can't do this.
Yeah.
And mostly my collecting, I collect hardcover collections and graphic novels and stuff like that. I love kind of having it on the bookshelf, that kind of thing. And my single issue collection, it sort of has its beginning point and its end point. And I'm good with that. Because I think I would go nuts, and down a rabbit hole, a monetary rabbit hole that I really can't afford to do with single issues these days. But sometimes there are single issues I still have to, like when Saga starts coming back out again, I'll get that on a monthly basis or however long, rapid.
That actually is funny you mentioned about Saga. Is it issue 40? What's the issue? It's issue, what number? I forget what number is coming up. There's a bit. It's a middle. It's a random number because obviously it's continuing of Saga before.
Right.
That issue is technically, is it going to be considered to a lot of people like another issue number 1? Like, I feel like that's going to be one of those weird issues in the middle of a series that's going to be wanted and sought after because of the fact that it hasn't been made in so many, in so long, that people are going to want that one. For sure.
It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to it on the market. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have all this legacy numbering that happens now with like Marvel and DC, where they renumber things and start off with new number 1s. And then like 3 years later, it becomes 1,704, or whatever.
I mean, 2015 for me in the Marvel side just started throwing everything for a loop because, I mean, it was 2015. There was like Unbeatable Squirrel Girl number 1. And 2016, there was an Unbeatable Squirrel Girl number 1. And people were always like, oh, we got to go back and get that issue. I'm like, which one is it? Is it 15 or 16? That was the number 1, not number 1, but like, and so, it's gotten way more confusing over the years, but the legacy numbers have helped. Yeah. And it's actually turned out, I think Spider-Man 800 or 900, I forget which one it is going to be issue 100 in this run. I think the way the timing is working out, that it actually might match up to be a big issue. So I guarantee that's going to be a $10 comic book like they've been doing for all these things. Avengers number 750 was $9.99.
That's right. I remember buying Amazing Spider-Man number 300 when it was brand new on the shelf.
Yeah.
First Venom.
Not for $9.99. I guarantee you that.
No,
I can't believe it. The number of times now books are $9.99.
That book must have been, it was double size. I think it was $1.50 maybe.
Yeah. And these comic books are double size. I understand that, but I'm still like $10 for a book is like a comic book there's Undiscovered Country number 1, which is 5 issues, is like $9.99. And like, I get 5 issues of that book for that price. It's fascinating on that, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the whole like book club part. You didn't say book club, but there's been a book clubs for years for reading actual, full-on books.
Yeah.
The comic book side of it shouldn't be any different nowadays. And it's definitely a topic that's come up between me and a couple other people with the same idea. If people can talk and gossip over last week's episode of Hawkeye on Disney Plus. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing for comic books, but be on the same page. So like I mentioned about the Nailbiter thing, now I can actually have conversations with Paul about Nailbiter because I read the book. But if we were to read it at the same time, we could always talk back and forth on, what's going to happen, what do you think is going to happen, what did happen, and those kind of things. And I think that's pretty cool that you did that, because that's something I've actually wanted to do on certain things too. So if you jump into the Marvel side of things, you have to get in touch with me because we'll figure something out. But maybe we'll start another one. You got all kinds of time. I got all kinds of time, right?
We could start reading all the Jim Starlin Thanos stuff, right?
Yeah,
like, have you read like all the way back from like his early, like Jim Starlin's early cosmic stuff with Warlock and
yes, some of those ones I've touched here and there. I do have the Marvel Unlimited thing, so I jump in here and there. It's really hard. I will say one of the things the caveat to that is 80s and 90s comic books are not the easiest thing in the world to read. I'll tell you right now, the older comic books, 70s, 80s, and 90s, the writing was a lot different than it is now. I could always read Brian Michael Bendis stuff in the 2000s and 2010s. There's certain writers I can definitely read over and over again. George Perez, his stuff from like the artwork on that stuff back then captures me enough so I can read the stories. It was the same thing with reading like Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run and Todd McFarlane's Spawn. His artwork brings me in enough that I can get through his absolutely horrendous writing. I'll tell you that right now. I can say that because he's never going to come on this podcast. Todd McFarlane cannot write comic books.
But I bet you can get Rob
right
Liefeld.
now.
Come on, he does anybody's.
But yeah, so yeah, I have read back some of those things, but again, to me, it's more like I'll read a couple issues and then jump back into more current stuff. But there's a timeline to me there. It's probably 2005-ish, 2004 till 2016. That to me was I don't know what it is, maybe it's just my reading style or what I like. Marvel in those years to me were like, the Civil Wars, the Secret Invasions, the Infinity series.
Right.
Those books to me are a lot of like, oh, I could read those over and over and over again. Going back to Days of Future Past and all that stuff to me is like, I'll get to it, I'll read it again, but it's just, I can't. The 90s.
Days of Future Past is so good.
But it's like for what it is compared to what it is now. It's the same thing with like my wife is 10 years younger than me. And so when she watches a movie that's older, it's very difficult for her to watch a movie that's from the 70s and 80s. It's she wants the more current stuff. And there's specific movies that will work. Obviously, your Back to the Futures, your Star Wars, and all those things will definitely work. Other films are more slasher films or old school horror films from the 90s or 80s and 70s are like, oh god. But yeah, so there's this thing about reading older comic books. I have read a bunch of them and because I like it, but I'd almost rather listen to or watch a episode of a podcast that you did where you read this series and you're explaining it to me than actually physically reading it.
You say that, we're awful.
I'm saying, I don't know. I love podcasts and stuff like that. So I host one, so I want to make sure that I read or listen to other people's stuff too. But hey, I don't have time to read all this stuff, so I have to pick and choose. And when there's 27,000 comic books available on Marvel Unlimited, plus the ones I'm buying and reading now, I don't understand how that dude, what's his name, who wrote all the Marvels, James Wolk, how he got 27,000 comic books read, but.
Yeah, that's really amazing too, to do that, to be locked, not locked, but to be able to get into that room and read every Marvel comic ever published. Like that's a fanboy's dream, right?
And to understand it too, because you could technically, I could give you a bunch of comic books and you could read them, like you can actually physically read the words, but actually comprehend what's going on. Is another whole realm to actually be able to write a book about it so that I would understand you reading those comic books. It's fascinating to me. So there's some that he said he skipped because he's a writer. He's wrote other things. And so he's done segments in other books about certain series. Yeah. And so he's like, I've already read, technically, I checked that box off. There was no time frame for him to read this. I've already read those books. I don't have to read them again. And he wasn't going to put them in this book so that you would go buy his other book, I'm guessing. Which is smart, but but 27. When I started reading the book, I was like, I don't know about this, and then it's pretty fascinating. And he doesn't go in order. Everybody, if anybody's listening to this and wants to figure that out, it's not like he's going, okay, 1963, Fantastic Four #1. He goes over the Fantastic Four, then he goes over Spider-Man, and he goes over, and he has a break in the middle where he talks about Ditko and Kirby and Stan Lee and stuff like that. So there is this all over the place kind of thing. So you don't just go, okay, starting at issue 1 and we're going to end at issue whatever.
Right. He's kind of compiled, key moments and,
Yes.
certain themes together and stuff like that. And also I like how, there's elements in that book where he's related it to what was going on in our world too. Which, especially when you are talking about Marvel Comics, is such a key element. That was why Marvel Comics, like just caught on so well, because it was the world outside your window, right? I mean, that was how Stan Lee had, pushed it, and that's how it really was. And that was great, and being able to, kind of correlate, especially now, if he knows what he's talking about in history, in a sense that he can do that. Younger readers reading even some of these back issues now would not, you read the famous, Amazing Spider-Man drug issues, what was it, 97, 98, 99, where, Harry Osborn's, on drugs and stuff like that. And it seems like, okay, what you read that now, you're like, whatever. Plus, were they really wearing those kind of clothes? But yes, they were wearing those clothes.
They were.
But at the time, you didn't have that kind of story, and in comics, and it was a really different era, like in how people were, reacting to stuff in the real world. I mean, you have comics like that. You've got the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Green Lantern, Green Arrow drug issues. I mean, there were really pivotal moments in comic book storytelling that touched on what was going on in the real world. That it's hard to recreate those moments.
And they're doing it now, though. I mean, they are doing it, with the the current Superman, storylines and things like that. So they are handling that with, and the Marvel side with Hulkling and all those, like Wiccan. They're taking the times and putting it into books, because this is, I mean, technically for a lot of us, this is supposed to be going on basically current with all comic books over the years. I mean, the guy James Wolk, or Douglas Wolk, says in the book, like, that they've gone since 1963 till 2017, when he stopped reading the books. There was Marvel Legacy #1, 2017, when he stopped. That the Marvel universe has actually only gone like 14 years.
Right.
Like, it's funny like how it was, but it's only gone 14 years. So everybody's only 14 years older, but they've actually dealt with issues that have gone along the way too. Yeah. So it's like, the 9/11 issues of comic books that came out right after the 9/11 tragedy. Those technically happened in 2001, but really it was like ambiguous because of the fact that it's only been 14 years in the Marvel universe. So it's fascinating on that aspect of it too. But that's one of the things I always say is they're culturally current on a lot of comic books nowadays. When you read these superheroes or capes and tights kind of comic books, but it's there's things they deal with, and that's one of the things I won't go on for a long time on. But why Stan Lee's and Ditko and Kirby and all those guys creating characters back in the day made them more realistic, to the point where I could potentially go to New York City and see Spider-Man, swinging around and dealing with the issues I'm dealing with.
It was relevant, it felt relevant, you could connect with those characters in a way, especially, the readers, were a lot of, more youth reading comics back then than they are now, really. But and to this day, I can't go to New York City and not look up, and just in my mind's eye, I'm just envisioning it all, right? Like, all the battles, all the, you come across, into New York City, and you're still sort of above some of the rooftops of, some of the, suburbs of stuff. And you're like, okay, I see how they're running across those rooftops, right? Like, I can see that. You can't do that here in Bangor, Maine, unless you can jump really far. But you can see how that's done in New York City. And being able to, like, just sort of imagine that, and imagine those characters that feel like they could be you, is so important. And that's we talked a little bit about Brian Michael Bendis before, and him and the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man. But even before he created that version, he created the original Ultimate Spidey version as well. And in both times, I think he really hit on it. He made the characters relevant, and really hit it out of the park with Miles Morales when he created that character, because he does feel relevant to today. He feels like a kid today. I mean, maybe 20, 30 years from now, somebody will read, Miles Morales comics and be like, what? Come on. But today it's like, yeah, that's
I feel
more who a real Spider-Man is going to be than Peter Parker back in 1966, 67, Well,
I think 20 years from now, some kid might wake up and we are, Peter Parker isn't Spider-Man, that Miles Morales is Spider-Man, or Gwen Stacy is Spider-Man, or Spider-Ham is their Spider-Man. Like, Peter Parker is always going to be Spider-Man, but there may be someday that someone of color who can look at Miles Morales and be like, that looks like me. That's their Spider-Man, and always will there be their Spider-Man. And that's why I love the idea that the Spider-Verse exists, because there's technically a Spider-Man for everybody. There's probably short Spider-Man, overweight Spider-Man, Spider-Man with diabetes, but there's a Spider-Man out there that falls into your category that you can agree with. And if there isn't one, write that Spider-Man, send it off to Marvel and say, you should make this Spider-Man. And
the
maybe
bookstore
one day,
owner that is secretly Spider-Man. I'm going to get on that.
Maybe one of these days you'll be writing for Marvel or drawing for Marvel. I don't know. Ben Bishop, local Maine artist and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles artist, posted his letter to Marvel not that long ago on his Instagram. And I thought it was pretty funny. I'm like, I feel like there's a lot of artists and writers nowadays that work for professional comic book companies that have done the exact same thing and have the exact same thing at not an age where you really were trying to get a job, at an age of like 8. Be like, how old do you need to be a Marvel writer or artist?
Well, it's funny, I mean, there are, people who are the power people in comics in the 80s and 90s who did start off that way, who did write. I mean, Jim Shooter, who later became editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics through some of the biggest times in the 80s, Secret Wars and all that stuff. He got his start, as a kid, he'd written letters in, and he, as a teenager, started writing Legion of Superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you imagine? Like,
that's the equivalency of like LeBron James entering the NBA at 18. Like, it's like you're playing professional, big man's game, the adult game at a young age. It's fascinating to me. Yeah.
Get the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
I think we could talk about comic books honestly forever. I in books in general. Like I said, this 2021 is the year of the book for me. I'm going to put that down. Is it the Chinese calendar, the year of the book? Is that what this is? Not the year of the tiger or anything like that. It's the year of the book. Right. But I agree with that. There's something out there in a bookstore nowadays for everybody. I do think that there's a book. Like I said, I don't know if I would go in there and pick up a novel by the same author that my wife would want to read. The only one I will say is Charles Soule is probably an author that we both read, because he writes a lot of comic book stuff, but she also loves a lot of his other stuff that he's written as well. But there's a book out there for everyone. We
carry his books too. If you haven't read Anybody, that's a great one.
Yeah, we had that on the shelf.
Excellent.
Is that is it anyone or anybody? Anyone?
Oh, Anyone. I think you're right.
Yes, right.
Blue cover.
It's blue. Yeah, I can see it right here. But she's got some Nora Roberts books up there that I don't know if I'd ever touch. I've got 5 copies of Nathan the Caveman by Ben Bishop. 5 different copies. They're different variant covers. You can tell he's a comic book artist. He has variant covers for his books. And I have
I've got an original first printing of that, original edition.
I have an omnibus of curse words too, which is a great book from Charles. So, but yeah, I mean, there's a book out there for everybody. And again, if you go into a place like Briar Patch, there's gonna be things in there that are also not just full of words. You have everything. So, and if you can't get it or you don't have it, you can get it. Mostly.
Sure. Yeah. And, and the Briar Patch for years and years and years was just a kid's bookstore. And then over the past couple of years, especially during the pandemic, we started carrying more adult books because we're the only bookstore downtown. So we're still trying to, get rid of some of that, perspective where people think we're just kids. We've got books for grownups too. We don't say adult books because that sounds weird.
It does, and that's why I was just when you ever we look up Amazing Fantasy 15 to see like the value. Every once in a while, I jump on to see what the value of that book is. First appearance of Spider-Man, and it's still in parentheses in a lot of websites as Amazing Adult Fantasy. And I was like, I'm so glad that when that book was actually released, they removed the word adult out of there because it's a completely different meaning nowadays.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah. So Briar Patch is in downtown Bangor. If you live in the Bangor area, if you don't, check them out online. BriarPatchBooks.com. And Facebook.
Books.com.
You're also on Facebook and stuff like that too. So
Yeah, all the socials. I'm gonna leave you with a book recommendation though.
Okay.
This is just for you because you saw the new Spider-Man movie today, and you have a kid who you're gonna want to share your love of Spider-Man with. So there is a tie-in picture book called Spider-Man's. It's hard to see because I got the blurred background thing going on here. Spider-Man's Very Strange Day. Woo! Can we get it in there?
You have it in your hand. Is that your copy or is that one from the store?
This is one from the store.
Okay, I'm gonna be in this week, so we'll have to get that this week too.
So that way you can share your love of Spider-Man with your kid.
Because it's funny because you talked about like he's 7 months old, so him opening Christmas presents is more about the wrapping paper than anything. So my wife and I joked about like taking things that are in the house and just wrapping them and giving them as gifts. But then I was like, well, let's give him some gifts to it. This is his first Christmas, so I bought him a used copy of the book that was made off of the movie Follow That Sleigh, which is a claymation movie from the 90s. That was a VHS. It's only made in VHS. You can't get it on DVD. They have the VHS of it, but it's a book that they put the basically screenshots from screen grabs from the movie in. And so I wrapped that up, and I was like, well, now I can get that book for him too and wrap it up, even though he won't know what the heck's going on when he opens it, and we'll care about the wrapping paper more. A couple of years from now, I can read it to him. He'll understand.
Exactly.
But sweet. I appreciate you coming on, man, and talking comic books and books and stuff like that. We'll have to get you back on at some point, talk about some other stuff too. But yeah, check them out. BriarPatchBooks.com, but check them out. Briar Patch in downtown Bangor. Swing by, grab a bagel or something like that, eat that up, and then go there. And then when you're done at Briar Patch, you can swing up the street to Orono Brewing Company and grab a pint. See? All in one thing right there.
Good times.
Thanks a lot for coming on. I'll see you this week for sure. Pick up those books.
You got it. Thank you.